I greet you in Jesus' precious name. We are sitting in a little cottage on the farm. And if you listen very carefully, you might even be able to hear drops of rain on the roof. It is raining outside and we are rejoicing. God is answering our prayers. Folks, I want to speak to you about something very special in my life, and that is using what you've got and not what you haven't got. In other words, stop always envying other people. Stop always complaining. If I had this, then I could do that for you, Lord. And Lord, if you gave me this, then I could really do something. No. What have you got in your hand? Remember, God said that to Moses. When Moses said, I stutter and I can't speak, and what have you got in your hand? I've got a stick. He said, use the stick. Remember, the stick became a snake. I want to say to you today, we need to get away from that mindset, woe is me. You know, I never had much of an education. If I'd had a proper education, I could have done something for God. No, wrong. If your heart is right for God and you really love Jesus, He will use you with what you've got. You know, when I was a young boy, I left school very early. I left school, I was 15 and a half years old. It was my decision. My folks said, if that's what you want. And when I met the Lord, I went to my minister. And he was a very kind man. And he was a university graduate himself, 7 years studying theology. And I said to him, I want to become a preacher. What must I do? He said, well, first of all, you've got to go to university. I said, well, I haven't got a university entrance. Well, son, he says, I'm sorry. Now, it wasn't the minister's fault. It was my fault. But straight away, I just switched off. I thought, well, that's it. I can't go to university. I can't study theology, so I can't be a preacher. And I'll have to just carry on. And I went off into the far country, literally like a prodigal son. I went to Scotland. I went to Australia. I was all over, back in Zambia. Okay, until I met the Lord in South Africa, right here in Greytown, on the 18th of February, 1979. Now, I want to speak to you about the men of God that the Lord has used to change the world. We can start off with Moses. Some say he was the greatest statesman that has ever lived, ever. And we're talking about people like Eisenhower, Stalin. You can talk about Churchill, talk about great people, whether they're good or bad, who impacted the world. But no statesman has ever impacted the world more than Moses. Moses took an entire nation of over 1 million people through a treacherous desert for 40 years. That is some doing. And all he had was a stick. Remember, what's in your hand? Well, let's just go straight to the Gospel of Mark, chapter 1 and verse 16. And let's see. And as he walked by the sea of Galilee, he saw Simon and Andrew, his brother, casting a net into the sea, for they were fishermen. So God used fishermen. Jesus called fishermen to do his bidding. Not only did he call them, but Simon Peter actually headed up the first church. So we're not saying that Jesus went to the greatest university in Greece, in Athens, and he went and looked for some intellectuals. No. Those fishermen, I don't think they could read or write. They might have, we don't know. But God used ordinary fishermen, and he changed them from fishing for fish to fishing for souls. And we know the story. That's a start. So we're talking about fishermen. What about Job? Let's go to the book of Job, chapter 1 and verse 3. Also, his possessions were 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, 500 female donkeys, and a very large household. So that this man was the greatest of all the people of the East. Job was a farmer. That's right. He wasn't an academic. He was a farmer. Very successful farmer who's feared God. And the Lord used Job. Oh, I love that book, Job, folks. Not just because I'm a farmer. Some say it's the oldest book in the Bible. The book of Job. And if you're going through a tough time at the moment, there's one person that can understand what you're going through. That's right. His name was Job. He lost everything. Everything. He lost his business. So if I'm talking to a man or a woman here who's gone bankrupt, go and read the book of Job, and you'll see what happens. But the amazing thing was, at the end of his life, because he did not deny the Lord, he had double the amount of riches that he had at the beginning. God restored everything. Job understands suffering. Job understands failure. Job was a farmer. He was not a professional counselor with degrees and doctorates. I want to qualify something else right at this point, because I don't know why, I can just hear maybe some people are saying, have you got a thing against intellectuals? Not at all. Not at all. Folks, I want to tell you, Gamaliel was a very intelligent man. I want to say something to you. Joseph of Arimathea was a man of status. What about Nicodemus? He was a member of the Sanhedrin, the ruling body of Israel. I've got no problem with education. My children are educated. They have degrees. Okay? But what the point I believe the Holy Spirit is trying to make to you, sir, and to you, madam, is don't look down on yourself. Don't feel that you've missed the boat. Don't feel that if you had studied harder at school, God could have used you more. Not at all. And so, Job, I tell you what, you read that book and you will be encouraged, because he went through hell and he did not deny the Lord, not once. So we're talking about a fisherman. We're talking about a farmer. What about 1 Samuel chapter 16 and verse 11? 1 Samuel chapter 16 and verse 11. Let's see what that says. It says, and Samuel said to Jesse, are all the young men here? And then he said, there remains yet the youngest, and there he is, keeping the sheep. He was a shepherd. He was the youngest of all of them, number 8. 7 big, strong men Jesse brought in to meet the man of God, Samuel. Samuel said, not him, not him, is there nobody else? Yes, we've got a young shepherd out there. He's looking after the sheep. Bring him. David. To this day in Israel, if you speak to any Jew, they'll tell you that their champion is King David. He could sing like no one else. He could play that harp. He was a man's man. He killed a giant that no one else could even attempt to attack. He was a wise man. Yes, he did drop the ball. He did mess up. He repented. God forgave him. But David is still the darling of the Jewish people. What was David? He was a shepherd, folks. He was a shepherd. What am I saying? Are you getting the picture? So far, we're speaking about fishermen. We're speaking about farmers. Now we're speaking about a shepherd. Let's go to Acts chapter 18 and verse 3. Acts chapter 18 and verse 3. You know, I really want you to know something. I love the Word of God. I love it. Acts chapter 18 and verse 3, and I'm reading out of the New King James Version. This is what it says. It says, so, because he was of the same profession, no, it doesn't say profession. Because he was of the same trade, he was a blue-collar worker, he was an artisan, he was a tradesman, like a boilermaker, a blacksmith. My dad was a blacksmith. Because he was of the same trade, he stayed with them and worked, for by occupation they were tent makers. Now, who was the tent maker? You should know. The tent maker was probably the greatest of all the apostles in the Bible. Yes, I'm talking about Paul, the apostle. He was a tent maker. He says, you can read it in Corinthians, he said, I didn't take anything from any of you. I worked for my own money and keep. I didn't come and scrounge and beg. No, I did it myself. We're talking about a man who wrote 2/3 of the New Testament. A man who suffered greatly for the privilege of being God's spokesman. And then I've kept it for last. Mark chapter 6 and verse 3. This is what it says. Is this not the carpenter, the son of Mary? Another tradesman, another blue-collar worker, another man who earned his keep by using his hands. Who was he? He was the darling of heaven. He was the very Son of God. He was the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end, the bright shining star, the lily of the valley, the great plowman, the shepherd of the sheep, and the friend of sinners. That's right. His name was Jesus. Jesus Christ. He was a carpenter by trade. You know, just getting ready for this program, when our producer was setting up everything, I thought to myself, Lord, it would be wonderful. I'm a dreamer, you see. It would be wonderful if I could see one of those chairs, or maybe a table, or a bed that the Son of God made. Oh yes, his father was a carpenter too, Joseph. 30 years. He worked in the carpenter shop. And then 3 years of ministry. You see, folks, you need a story to tell. There's no use just studying and studying and studying and studying. You become distracted, disconnected from the world. See, when you want to preach the gospel, you have to be able to identify with the people that you're talking to. And that's where a lot of guys fall down. They don't connect. See, it's like a young man coming out of university. He's got a master's degree in theology, but he's never had a girlfriend in his life. He's never been married, and now he has to sit in an office and counsel a married couple who are having marriage problems, who have got children. Oh no, but Angus, he can read the Bible. I know he can read the Bible, but he's got to live the life. Until that man has been into life where he has had a relationship with a girl, fallen in love with her, married her, started building their home from nothing, having little children, the financial strain, the social keeping up with the Joneses strain. Unless he's been there, he's got nothing to say. And they'll pick it up within 2 minutes. People can see that, folks. You've got to be able to walk the talk. You've got to be able to have been there. Otherwise, you just don't make any impact. You must be able to identify with people. See? When I get an invitation to go overseas to preach, fortunately, they don't ask me what my qualifications are, because I've got no qualifications. But you know something? They ask me to come and preach. They know that I'm not a theologian, a pastor. I'm a farmer. And they invite me there as a farmer. I was invited to a very prestigious church. I go to any church, from the smallest to the biggest, whoever invites me. And when they invited me to this church, it was one of these mega churches. No problem with that at all. There was a big list of all the things you must do. Your group of men coming with you cannot come on the platform, only you. You must wear a 3-piece suit. Not a suit, 3-piece suit, waistcoat, the whole lot. You must do this and you must do that. So my secretary wrote straight back, what Angus wears is a cowboy hat. He wears cowboy clothes because he's a cowboy. I've got cattle on the farm and horses. No, there's no problem. With Angus, he can come as he is. Okay, so there's an identification. You must be able to identify with the people. So when I go to Australia, I speak the language of the farmers when they take me to the outback. When I go to Namibia, same type of terrain, same story. Then I can go to another country like the UK, where it's very fertile. We talk another breed. Okay? We need to identify. You don't just go in there like a bull in a china shop. You just destroy everything. First, you identify with the people. You ask them, how's it going with the farming? How's the weather? Are you battling with a drought? Have you got disease? Is there an economic problem? How's the political situation? Then these people say, this guy understands what we're talking about. And then we come in with the gospel of Jesus Christ. And that's exactly how it works. The big fisherman, he knew how to talk about fish. Peter, I'm talking about. Oh, yes. Job was a farmer. He could say, how are the cattle doing? How's the pregnancy going this time? You've got to identify with people. You've got to speak the same language. When in Rome, do as the Romans do. Okay? I'm not talking about lowering your standard, of course not. But when in Rome, do as the Romans do. Don't go there and be like a fish out of water, because you lose him before you start. You've got to identify with people. You've got to speak their language. You've got to understand. If you go to a place like New Zealand where they love rugby, like South Africans do, and I've been there, and I've preached top island and the bottom island, and you start off speaking about rugby, straight away you've caught all those young sportsmen. And then after that, you start telling them about Jesus Christ. Folks, it's a lot easier than going over there and saying, I don't play sport, I'm not interested in sport, I think it's a brutal game. And now you want to win these men for Christ. You must be joking. You'll be lucky if you get out of that hall alive. We've got to identify with people. And we've got to use examples that people of the trade can understand. Okay, so I go over there and we go around the farm. And he says, I want to show you my new plow. I want to show you my new tractor. I want to show you a new breed of cow we've got. What have you got in South Africa? That's how we start. And sometimes the guys who are the most anti when it comes to Christianity are the ones that get saved first. We've seen it at Mighty Men conferences. Men just coming in because we are talking the language they understand. And we are honoring them for what they're doing. You know the old saying, never, ever complain about farmers with your mouth full, because farmers produce food. You see what I'm saying? And that's what you've got to do. The school of life is where I got my degree. The school of hard knocks. And that's not a joke, by the way, folks. You see, unless you've been through tragedy, unless you've been through heartbreak, unless you've lost a loved one, you don't understand. And don't ever try and tell somebody you understand when you don't, because he'll see straight through you. Does that mean you've got to have a bad background to have a good testimony? Not at all. But what I'm trying to say to you is, I went through a tragedy in my own life where I lost my little nephew. People come to me, they're still coming to me many, many years later. That little 4-year-old boy will be over 40 years old now in heaven, waiting for me. Little Alistair. People that come here are people that are really struggling. And when they sit down, I don't have to talk much. The tears start welling up in their eyes, and the tears start welling up in my eye. And the main thing I do is give them a hug. And I say to them, I look at them in the eye, and I say, I understand. And they know I understand because I've been there. And then I tell them, but you're going to get through this. And I also tell them the truth. I don't tell them lies. I tell them you'll never get over this, but God's grace will get you through. And what will happen is these tsunamis every now and again will just break over you and you think you're drowning. But He'll pick you up and He'll pull you through. Because I've been there myself. We need to understand that God uses ordinary people to preach the gospel. You need to get your hands dirty. You need to be able to get in and really roll up your sleeves and help people. You know, Gypsy Smith was a naturalist. He was a Romany gypsy. He lived in a little painted wagon. He used to preach to crowds of 10,000 people. He said, it takes a dead fish to flow with the current. It takes a live one to swim against it. See? He would stop preaching in the middle of a sermon and tell you these geese are flying to the North Pole now and explain everything about it because he lived. And that's why people loved him so much. You and I need to understand something. Don't underestimate your ability. You might be a carpenter, a blacksmith, a boiler maker, an electrician. You might be a sportsman, a school teacher. It doesn't matter. Tell people what Jesus means to you. That's what preaching is. Until next time, God bless you and goodbye.